The morning I collapsed, I was on my third cup of coffee before 7 a.m. and hadn't eaten anything since the granola bar I shoved in my mouth sometime around 2 the previous afternoon. I remember the fluorescent lights in the office hallway. That's the last thing I remember clearly. Those awful lights. The ones that always buzz just slightly. The kind of buzz you stop hearing after a while, but your body never does. I was walking to the printer. Then I wasn't walking anymore. I woke up in the hospital. There were tubes in my arm and a blood pressure cuff squeezing my left bicep every 15 minutes, like it had a point to prove. A nurse with reading glasses pushed down her nose told me I'd been brought in by ambulance. She said the words hypertensive crisis and severe exhaustion, the way people say things they've said 100 times before. Carefully, but without weight. To her it was Tuesday. To me, it was the first time I'd heard my body described as something that had nearly failed. I was 31 years old. My mother got the call before I was even conscious. Apparently my emergency contact, still her, because I'd never gotten around to updating it, was notified within the hour. She told me later she'd cried on the phone. She told me she'd been terrified. She told me a lot of things in those first few hours, and I believed all of them, because when you're lying in a hospital bed and your mother is holding your hand, you want to believe her. You need to. She left 4 days later. Not because I was discharged. Not because I was better. She left because my brother had booked a non-refundable cabin in Whistler for the long weekend, and the whole family was going. And she actually said this to my face, "You're stable now, sweetheart. You don't really need us here anymore." Stable. Like stable meant fine. Like stable meant okay. I didn't say anything. I watched her smooth down her coat, kiss my forehead, and walk out of the room dragging her overnight bag behind her. My father followed without making eye contact. My brother didn't come to the hospital at all. I lay there listening to the blood pressure cuff squeeze my arm and thought, this is what I've been killing myself for. I should explain what I mean by that. I'm the oldest of 3. My brother is 4 years younger than me. My sister is 7 years younger. Growing up, we weren't poor exactly, but money was always tight enough that I noticed it. My parents both worked, but there were conversations behind closed doors, credit card statements left on the kitchen table, a particular tension that came over the house at the end of every month. I understood early that I was not supposed to add to that tension, so I didn't. I got good grades. I won a partial scholarship to Carleton, I worked part-time every semester, graduated without debt, and landed a job at a mid-sized accounting firm in Ottawa within 2 months of convocation. I was 23. I felt like I had done something right. Then my mother called to tell me the property taxes had gone up, and they were having a hard month, and could I possibly help out just this once? And I said yes. Of course I said yes. They were my parents. That was 8 years ago. The just this once became a monthly e-transfer. $500, then $800, then $1,200 when my father's hours got cut. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself things would stabilize. I used the word stabilize a lot, I realize now, about everything except myself. My brother, who is 27 and has never held a job for more than 8 months, moved back home after his third fresh start fell through. And my mother mentioned, gently, that the grocery bill had gone up. I increased the transfer to $1,500. My sister got engaged to a man I'd met twice. And my mother called me before she called anyone else, not to share the news but to ask whether I could contribute to the engagement party. $4,000. Just to help cover the venue and catering. You know how these things add up. I knew. I was the one adding them up. By the time I collapsed in that office hallway, I had given my family somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 over 8 years. I know this, because I went back through my bank statements in the hospital, lying there with the IV in my arm and nothing else to do. $60,000 to $70,000. I had $11,000 in savings. I was renting a one-bedroom apartment I could barely afford because I turned down the chance to buy a condo 3 years earlier. I didn't have enough for a down payment because the money kept going somewhere else. I don't say this to make myself sound like a martyr. I'm saying it because I think I needed to see the number written down somewhere before I could understand what had actually happened. The first 2 days in the hospital, my mother was there. My father came the first afternoon and left early because he said the parking downtown was too expensive. A coworker named Yvette sent flowers. My college roommate called from Vancouver and talked to me for an hour about nothing in particular, which was the kindest thing anyone did that whole week. On day 3, my mother started talking about Whistler. I heard her on the phone with my brother in the hallway outside my room. She was saying things like, "The deposit is already paid. And Dr. Nguyen said she's improving, and we can't just lose the whole amount." I stared at the ceiling and counted the tiles. There were 42 plus 3 partial ones along the east wall. She came back in and sat down and explained the situation. The cabin rental was non-refundable. The whole family had been planning this for months. My brother had already taken the days off work. This surprised me, since I hadn't realized he had a job to take days off from. But I didn't say that. She said the doctors seemed optimistic. She said I was in good hands. She said they'd be back by Monday. I asked her what I was supposed to do if something happened over the weekend. She said, "Nothing's going to happen, sweetheart. You're stable." There's that word again. They left Friday morning. I know the exact time because I asked a nurse what time it was after I heard my mother's heels clicking away down the corridor and the sound stopped and there was just the blood pressure cuff and the buzzing of the equipment and a woman in the next bay crying quietly. 10:47 a.m. I was alone. What nobody tells you about being in the hospital by yourself is how long the nights are. During the day, there are nurses checking vitals, meal trays arriving, the general ambient noise of a ward doing its business. But at night, it gets very quiet, and the quiet has a texture to it, and you lie there in that texture and think about your life with a clarity that is not always welcome. I thought about the transfers. I thought about the condo. I thought about the conversation I'd had with my manager 2 weeks before the collapse, when he'd sat me down and said, very carefully, that he was concerned about my hours, that I was consistently the first one in and the last one out, that I seemed, and he chose this word deliberately, depleted. I'd told him I was fine. I was always fine. I thought about the last time someone had asked me what I wanted. Not what I could do, not what I could do, not what I could give, not what I could manage, but what I actually wanted. I couldn't remember when that had been. On the 3rd night alone, I couldn't sleep. I pressed the call button and asked the night nurse if I could have some water, mostly just to have someone to talk to for 30 seconds. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and an unimpressed expression that I found oddly comforting, like a person who had seen enough that she wasn't going to pretend anything was different from what it was. She brought the water. She asked if I needed anything else. I said no, I was okay. She nodded and turned to leave, and then she paused at the door. She said, "You've had a visitor. Every night so far, actually. Signs in at the front desk, sits for a while, signs out. Didn't want to disturb you since you were sleeping. I thought you should know." I stared at her. "Who?" She said she didn't know the person personally, just that someone had been signing in. She said I could ask at the front desk in the morning if I wanted to know more. I lay awake for the rest of the night. In the morning, I asked the day nurse, and she said she'd look into it. An hour later, she came back and said the front desk could show me the visitor log if I wanted. Standard practice, apparently. Patients have a right to see who has been accessing their information and visiting their room. The log was a printed sheet, the kind of bureaucratic document that exists in hospitals everywhere. Unremarkable in every way except for what it said. There were my mother's signatures on days 1 and 2. My father's on day 1. And then, on nights 2, 3, and 4. A name I didn't recognize. A man's name. Signed in at 9 p.m., signed out around midnight, every night, without exception. The column for relationship to patient said, family friend. I read it 3 times. I didn't know anyone by that name. I was certain of this. I have a good memory for names, and this one had never appeared in my life in any form I could recall. I asked the nurse if she could describe him. She said she hadn't seen him herself, but she'd ask around. What came back was this. Older man, 60s maybe. Graying hair. Sat in the chair by the window. Didn't use his phone, didn't ring anything. Just sat. I felt something I couldn't name. Not fear, exactly. Something quieter than fear. My mother called on Saturday afternoon to check in. She sounded relaxed. I could hear wind in the background, and my brother laughing at something. She asked how I was feeling. I said I was okay. I asked how Whistler was. She said beautiful. Really beautiful. The mountains were incredible. I said, someone's been visiting me at night. I don't recognize the name. Did you send someone to check on me? There was a pause, a very specific kind of pause, the kind that has information in it. She said, what name? I told her. Another pause. Longer this time. She said, I don't know what you're talking about. She said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, slightly too quickly and slightly too flatly, the cadence just a hair off from natural. I've done enough financial audits to know what a rehearsed answer sounds like. I let the silence sit. She said, it's probably just someone from your office. You know how people are. I said I would figure it out. She said great. She was glad I was feeling better. She'd see me Monday. She hung up. I put the phone on the blanket and looked at the window, which had a view of a parking structure and a slice of gray November sky, and I understood, in the vague but certain way that you understand things before you have any actual evidence, that my mother had just lied to me. He came again that night. I'd asked the nurse to wake me if the visitor arrived. She did, touched my shoulder gently at 9:15 and said, he's here. I asked her to send him in. He was older than I'd imagined, or maybe just tired-looking, tall, broad-shouldered in the way that men carry when they used to be strong, and the strength has softened. But the frame remains. Gray at the temples. Reading glasses in his breast pocket. He stopped in the doorway when he saw that I was awake and my light was on, and the expression that crossed his face was so complicated I couldn't have named it. Relief, maybe. And something older than relief. I said, you've been here every night. He said, yes. I said, who are you? He came into the room. He sat in the chair by the window. He folded his hands together, the way people do when they're about to say something they've been practicing for a long time. He said, my name is Gerald. I'm fairly certain that I'm your biological father. I want to be precise about what happened to me in the next few seconds, because I think imprecision is how people misunderstand moments like that. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't feel a sudden rush of connection or warmth or recognition. What I felt was something closer to the sensation you get when you're doing a spreadsheet and you've been working from an incorrect formula for an hour, and suddenly you see the error, and everything recalculates. Everything recalculates. I thought about the way my father, the man I'd always called my father, had never quite looked at me directly. The way my mother used to go stiff in certain kinds of arguments. The ones that came close to certain years. The way I'd always felt like a person slightly outside the family photograph, even when I was standing in the middle of it. I said, how long have you known about me? He said, since before you were born. He said my mother and he had been together briefly when they were very young, that when she found out she was pregnant, she had already reconciled with my father. That she had made a decision and he had respected it, or tried to. That he had stayed away because she asked him to and because he thought it was the right thing to do. He said that when I was born, he had driven to the hospital and sat in the parking lot for 4 hours and then driven home. He said he had watched from a distance for 31 years. School concerts he'd read about in community newsletters, my graduation announcement, and the Carleton Alumni magazine, which he subscribed to because it was the only way he could track my progress. My company's website, where my name appeared in the staff directory. He said when the hospital called my mother's number and she didn't answer fast enough, a secondary notification had gone to a number she'd put on my original birth paperwork 31 years ago, and apparently never removed. An old number. His number. He still had the same number. He said, "I know you don't know me. I'm not asking you to. I couldn't not come." I looked at him for a long time. I said, "My parents left 4 days ago to go to Whistler." He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. My mother arrived Monday morning with a bag of Tim Hortons and a fresh guilt offering in the form of excessive cheerfulness. She was halfway through telling me about the view from the cabin when she stopped. Gerald was sitting in the chair by the window. I watched her face do something I had never seen it do. It didn't fall exactly. It reconfigured. Like a screen flickering before it goes dark. She said his name. Very quietly. He said hello. Also quietly. She looked at me. I said hello. Also quietly. She looked at me. I said, "He's been here every night. He told me everything." She set the Tim Hortons on the bedside table. She sat down in the other chair. For a moment, nobody said anything. And the blood pressure cuff squeezed my arm and released. And outside the window, a bus went by on the wet street. She said, "I was going to tell you when the time was right." Gerald said, gently but clearly, "The time has been right for 31 years. I think she expected me to be angry at her in the explosive way, the crying and accusations way. I wasn't. I was tired. I was so tired. I had been tired for years, and I had not let myself feel it. And now I was lying in a hospital bed where I'd been left alone all weekend while my family went to Whistler. And the only person who had sat with me in the dark was a man I'd never met who had driven to a hospital parking lot the day I was born and waited." I said, "I need some time." She said, "Of course. Of course, sweetheart." I said, "I mean from everyone. I need some time from everyone." I was discharged on Wednesday. My doctor gave me a package of referrals and a very direct conversation about what my blood pressure numbers meant if I didn't make changes. He used the phrase, "Your body issued you a warning," and said most people didn't get a second one. I did not go back to my apartment right away. I went to Yvette's place because she had offered when she dropped off the flowers, and she was the kind of person who means what she says. I slept on her pull-out couch for 11 days. I ate her soup and watched her terrible reality television and did not check my phone except to message work. I did not transfer money that month. I did not respond to the 3 texts my mother sent asking when we could talk. I did not answer when my brother called, which he did once, probably because my mother asked him to. What I did do was call the number Gerald had written on a piece of paper and left on my bedside table. I called it on a Thursday evening when the light was going gold through Yvette's kitchen window and her cat was sitting on the counter regarding me with the blank contempt that cats reserve for emotional situations. He answered on the second ring. We talked for 2 hours. About nothing important. First, his work, what he did, where he lived. The kind of ordinary biography you'd get from a LinkedIn profile, except warmer. Then about more important things. About the parking lot. About the Carleton Alumni magazine. About a photograph he had of me. Just one, from a community news article about a charity fundraiser I'd helped organize 5 years ago. That he kept in his desk drawer because it was the only one he had. I didn't cry on the phone. I cried after, in Yvette's bathroom with the fan on, for about 20 minutes. Then I washed my face and went back out, and she didn't say anything about my eyes, because she's a good friend. It has been 7 months since all of this. I have not gone back to the way things were. I want to be clear about that, because I think that's what people most need to hear when they've been where I was. That it's actually possible to not go back. I set a boundary with my parents that took me 3 drafts and a conversation with a therapist to articulate, but the short version is this. I am their daughter and I love them, and I am no longer their financial support. The monthly transfers stopped the month I was discharged. When my mother called to ask about contributing to my brother's latest venture, I said no. Just that word, flat and clean. She said she didn't understand what had gotten into me. I said I'd been in the hospital alone for 4 days and that had gotten into me. She didn't call back for 3 weeks. When she did, she didn't mention money. My brother has not called since. My sister called once, in February, and it was actually a real conversation. Not a request, just 2 people talking. She told me she hadn't known how bad things had gotten on my end. I believe her. She was 7 when the transfer started. She grew up thinking that's just what I did. Gerald and I have dinner once a month. Italian place on Elgin Street that he found. Not too loud. Good pasta. We're still figuring out what we are to each other, which is fine. It doesn't need a label yet. What it needs is time. And for the first time in years, I have some of that. I updated my emergency contact. I got a second opinion on my blood pressure medication. And I joined a yoga class on Wednesday evenings that I actually attend because I'm not working until 9 p.m. anymore. I still drink too much coffee. I'm working on it. I have not found a way to fully explain to myself how I let things go on that long. I've spent a lot of time in therapy trying to understand the mechanics of it. How someone reasonably intelligent, reasonably capable, reasonably aware of the world can give away $60-some thousand over 8 years and tell herself it's fine. My therapist says there's a difference between knowing something is happening and believing you have the right to stop it. She says a lot of children who carry a family's weight from a young age never learn that the weight isn't actually theirs to carry. I'm learning it now. Late, maybe. But the math still works out. The last time I saw Gerald, we were walking back to the parking garage after dinner, and he said, out of nowhere, "I used to wonder if you were happy. I couldn't ever tell from a distance." I thought about it for a minute. The office hallway, the fluorescent lights, $11,000 in a savings account, and 60,000 reasons why. I said, "I think I'm getting there." He nodded. We walked the rest of the way without talking, which is one of those things you can only do with certain people. I think I'm going to be okay. I think, for maybe the first time, I actually mean it. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes for a person to end up alone in a hospital bed while their family is somewhere taking photos of mountain views. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. It happens in increments so small you don't notice any single one of them. A transfer here. A yes when you meant no. A silence when you should have spoken. You look up one day and you've built an entire architecture of self-erasure, and you've done it so carefully, so consistently, that the people around you have simply come to expect it as load-bearing. I think about the version of me who started those transfers at 23. She wasn't weak. I want to be clear about that, because I spent a long time thinking she was. She was actually trying to do something good. She loved her family, and she had the means to help, and helping felt like the right thing to do. The problem wasn't the first transfer. The problem was that nobody, not her family, and not herself, ever built in a stopping point. Generosity without limits isn't virtue. It's just a different kind of avoidance. What I understand now is that there's a cause and effect running underneath all of it that I refused to look at for years. Every time I said yes when I couldn't afford to, I was teaching the people around me that yes was always available. Every time I absorbed a cost that wasn't mine to absorb, I was confirming that I was the person who absorbed costs. That's not something anyone did to me. It's something I participated in, every month, for 8 years. Seeing that clearly doesn't mean blaming myself. It means understanding the mechanics well enough to change them. Gerald taught me something just by existing. He had spent 31 years watching from a distance, making one quiet choice after another to show up without being asked for anything in return. He signed that visitor log every night, not because he wanted credit, not because he expected a relationship at the end of it, but because he thought it was the right thing to do and he did it anyway. There's a kind of integrity in that which I am still learning to recognize and build in myself. The kind that doesn't need an audience, doesn't need a thank you, doesn't calculate the return. Yvette's couch, the soup, the terrible television, that was the same thing. People who show up, not because they have to, because they decided to. I think the truest measure of a person isn't what they do when it costs them nothing. It's what they do when they've already given enough and someone asks for more. My mother's answer to that question, when I was in a hospital bed, was Whistler. My answer, for 8 years, had been another transfer. I don't say that to condemn either of us. I say it because I think the question is worth sitting with. I'm still sitting with it. I'm learning that the word no, said calmly and without apology, is not a failure of love, that taking care of yourself is not the same as abandoning the people around you. That a person who runs herself into a hypertensive crisis at 31 has not been strong, she has been afraid. Afraid of what happens when she stops. I know what happens now. Some people leave. Some people were already only there for what you could give them. And some people, the ones who matter, stay anyway. I updated my emergency contact. It's a small thing. It's also not a small thing at all.